Hey everyone, Andre here along with Tom and a very special guest today being David Wise, who really needs no introduction, but we have him here today to discuss 25 years of Diddy Kong Racing. That's right, it came out today as of the time of this recording in the UK and Japan, and a few days later in the US. And I was such a huge fan of this game growing up. I know Tom was as well, and we've already spoken to Kevin Bayless about the art side of Diddy Kong Racing. But of course, music is also art. And we had to talk to David Wise to find out more about the soundtrack for this game. David, how are you doing today?
Good, thank you. I can't believe it's 25 years, but there we go. It's time flies.
Yeah, how's that feel for you? Like, does it feel like it just happened last week for you, or?
It does. It's like it could have been yesterday. I mean, the trouble is, when you get to 21, then all of a sudden you're an old bloke.
Yeah,
flies past.
I'm starting to feel that more and more now. So, so I guess what is it like for you to look back on Diddy Kong Racing, like knowing that this game made such an impact on people, definitely at least partially because of the music.
It's amazing that 25 years later, somebody somewhere in the world is still talking about it, and not just me. So. That's quite cool because, as kids, if you bought an album, if people were still talking about it in 2 years, it had done well. So for something to be still talked about as a game 25 years after it came out, that's quite humbling.
Yeah, I imagine. Well, so Diddy Kong Racing had a very interesting history. So I kind of want to go back to the start of it here, if there even is a start when it comes to the music, because from what I understand, the history is a little bit like. Not entirely clear, but it sounds like it began as a Pro-Am 64.
Yeah, the company, it was Pro-Am 64, and then it was a bit further down the line when Nintendo got a bit more involved and realised that another game wasn't quite going to hit on time. Mm-hmm. And so they put their characters in, obviously Diddy Kong and a few others, into this game, and it became Diddy Kong Racing.
Right, so that's quite a big change.
It was quite a big change as well. It's quite unexpected because they'd already had Mario Kart out. So to put another kart out for Christmas was quite unexpected.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. They really weren't that far apart. So, I guess for you, what was it like on the music side of things? Had you already started writing music for the earlier versions of the game? Did you have to scrap all of that if you did?
No, not really. I mean, it's still got the original title tune in, which I'd written for the main game, and all we did was a couple of other tunes. And we did it within a 2-month period. It was right at the end, and slept at Rare for a couple of months whilst we finished it up.
Well, I was wondering about that. Yeah, because the development, was it planned always as a winter release, or did it get pushed up to Christmas?
No, I don't think we even had a release date when originally we were probably looking at the summer afterwards. And all of a sudden they needed a game, and ours was pretty much finished. And it was quite easy to morph the characters from Nintendo into what became Diddy Kong Racing, rather than try and shoehorn something else, because there wasn't anything else at that time on the N64 that was going to hit a Christmas spot.
Right.
So fortunately, we stepped in and, we got Christmas.
Because, yeah, and the game blew up, too. I mean, I remember reading that at the time of its release for that Christmas season, it was, I think the fastest-selling game of all time, which is absurd. And not that it deserved it. It was a great game, but the fact that you guys were able to put this together in such a short time frame is incredible.
Yeah, I think the fact that we managed to change it in such a short time frame, but we're all excited about, it's going to come out for Christmas, brilliant, okay, focus. And we did a lot of work in 2 months, but to be honest, most of the game, it was a functioning game even before that point. All we were doing was window dressing, really.
It sounds like you didn't have to change a whole lot, at least with the music you had already written. So you didn't have to, so the fact that Diddy Kong was now the star didn't really impact how the game sounded in this case?
Not really. I mean, if you go to the title screen, if you flick through the characters, they all change. But they were changing anyway. All we did was take the theme for Diddy Kong, or adapt the Diddy Kong thing and the theme, and put those little details into it. So as you went through the soundtrack, anything that needed Diddy Kong, suddenly we put Diddy Kong's theme in, and that kind of thing. So we did it all the way through the game. But they're only, in real terms, academic changes, really.
Got it. Okay. Well, that must have been nice. So you had a bit of a head start in that case.
In that regard, yes, but it's one of those things, when you go and change something, you have to go in and dig through the code and try and find out where everything is. So there was all of that going on
Right.
But it was still fun. It was still nice to see. It was still nice to adapt it and make it work for the Diddy Kong environment.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier like you had to sleep in the office to get the soundtrack done. And looking at the soundtrack, it had, I believe, over 40 tracks, because almost every track had a bespoke music to go along with it. So how the hell did you finish that in time? Like, how do you even approach the scope of that and get it done in time for Christmas?
I mean, when you look at the tracks, there's obviously long versions, but there's also a lot of shorter versions. I think that makes up some of the number. There's probably about 30 tracks, I think, the proper tracks. Again, we'd been writing it for almost 18 months by the time we got to that final development phase. So it was all functioning, working, and ready to go. And the other thing that's worth mentioning about that game is it was the most fun game ever. We'd get in early just so we could play it.
Wow.
For an hour before we started development, and we'd be there way past kicking out time, still playing it. And I think that's a good sign with any video game. If the development team love playing their own game, then it's a good sign that it's going to be quite successful.
You mentioned during DKC2 that they had to kind of pull you away from the keyboard at the end of the development. For this one, did you have a bit more time and a bit more relaxed finish?
I don't think it was relaxed, because it was one of those, we're finished now, and okay, I'll not do any more. But fortunately, the bulk had been done, so we were just changing things. It just came a cut-off point where you don't need to change anything more. You can go home now and get some sleep.
So it did. So being able to play the game during development, did that help create? Did that help you create with the creation process of the music?
With it being such a fun game, you'd go home, you'd sleep, and you'd wake up with lots of ideas to bring in to the development studio the next day, with lots of things to try. And so it was that very organic, interactive process where you want to try things, put it in, see how it works as you're playing the game, and it's quite an organic feeling. So yeah, it was good fun. And the other thing as well, it's quite but for lack of a better word, it's quite a cheesy game, as in it's meant to be cheesy. It's meant to be like a cartoon. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be wistful, and the same with the music. So all the time we were creating the music, I was trying to make it as cheesy, I suppose, as cliche as possible. So if I could change an instrument to make it sound even more, I don't know, more like a volcano, or more like a jungle, or more like a desert, I would do that. I would find the cheesiest instrument I could, put it in, and really just push that cliche to make it as fun as possible. Because not only was it fun to play, then it was fun to create for as well, because we were always trying to exaggerate the cliche.
It's so funny when you were saying that. The first song that came to my head was the one for Hot Top Volcano. Like, that's the one that was playing in my head, and you mentioned that as an example. So you nailed it. You totally nailed it. That's my point.
Well, yeah, I remember we still had a tiny amount of memory. So Graham did the sound effects, made a great job of those, but we were fighting for memory all the time. We had such a small amount, so we still had to do things very efficiently.
Right.
And so we had to think very carefully about which instrument. So I'd emulated the Indian sitar sound, and then I got the vocal sounds in, and those vocal sounds are from it's from a sample CD that was quite popular, Heart of Asia or something, and it's an Indian love song. So one of my friends at the time, I asked her what are the lyrics, and she was saying, well, it's from West India, and she said that there are so many languages in India that there's at least 500, and she said it's hard to know exactly which one it is, but vaguely it's a love song. And I chopped it up for the rhythmic effect. So I got this idea that I wanted for the melody and the rhythm of the melody, and so I just chopped it up. And so there's no sense in those lyrics at all. You couldn't actually give it to somebody and say, oh yeah, it says this, and it's just done on a syllabus or syllable rhythmic way to get it to work.
Wow, that's kind of amazing. I would have never expected that. So
yeah.
To a similar degree, some of the tracks, or at least one of the tracks, has, I think, like children singing in it as well. If you recall anything about that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is really Graham organised this, and what he did, he got the Stampers had young children, and Tim and Chris and Stephen, they had young children at the time, and we had a creche at Rare. with lots of young children in, and it happened to be Tim and Chris's offspring who are the kids on this thing. So Graham got them in there, and they started laughing, and he got them to do the singing la 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 la, and that's where that came from. So it's a complete family rare title.
That's amazing.
Rare family title. There we go.
Perfect for the holiday season. Yeah.
Completely. Yeah, definitely. And that was just, again, we're all in the spirit of bringing out the fun side of things, and Graham nailed it there and got the kids singing. Brilliant stuff.
David, was this your first N64 title to develop music for, and what was it like moving from the Super Nintendo?
It was good. I mean, it sounds really nice, the N64 audio system, and way ahead of it. It was warm. It's a bit like the graphics, because the graphics, although there weren't enough polygons, the polygons you did have actually looked quite nice. It did have a certain charm. And the same with the audio. It had a nice soft tone, even though it was a digital system. And it just sounded nice. It wasn't harsh at all. So in that regard, it was similar to the the Super NES, which also had a nice sound. The one thing with this, though, I could use MIDI. I could actually plug a keyboard into the N64 and play it, which I thought was amazing. That was, because before we were just coding everything, and that's a long process. So to actually have the freedom to write music that you didn't need to type lots of hex numbers into, that was very refreshing, very liberating.
So did you find working on the 64 any easier or more difficult than the Super Nintendo? Because I think the Super Nintendo had dedicated sound hardware, whereas with the 64, I believe you had to split it between the rest of the game. Again,
but we've always had to do that. You've always had to fight your corner for how much CPU you can use. I think it was using some of the GPU, CPU cycles. So we had enough to run about 16 channels, and I actually had two lots of 16 channels. So you can have a MIDI file and it will play 16 channels, and then we stacked two of those together, but we could only play about 12 sounds at any given time.
Got it.
So it was another technical challenge, but not quite as. But you didn't need quite as much focus on the technical side as you did on the Super NES. You could concentrate more on the music, which was nice to do.
Now, kind of to that point, you mentioned earlier you guys would play multiplayer in the office, and it was a ton of fun. So, unless I'm misremembering, I don't think I am, but maybe I am. I believe when you play with 3 or 4 players, the music is disabled in the game. So, did that? I don't know if Tom could back me up on this, but if that were the case, did that crush you as the composer, knowing you couldn't hear it when you're playing in multiplayer?
Well, probably. I mean, if you've ever played it 4-player, then there's just sound effects firing off all over the place.
Yeah, that's true.
You wouldn't really be able to hear the music that much.
That's a good point.
But certainly in single-player mode, when there's nobody else playing, I think that the music helps move it along.
Now, one of the things that this game did that I thought was really interesting, and I think gets overlooked, and it's something Banjo-Kazooie got a lot of credit for, was the dynamic soundtrack. But it seemed like this is the first game that I remember hearing it in, because you mentioned earlier you have the character select screen where the instruments change depending on the character. You also have, I think, the hub world, where as you fly around or move around, the music changes, and that also happened in Boulder Canyon as well. So do you know what inspired that idea, and what the process was for making those tracks?
I think it's every composer's dream to actually have a dynamic score that changes magically as you play the game and to the game states and stuff like that. And again, that's why we had two lots of MIDI files. So we had lots of the same tune on those 32 channels that we had, and just had some simple code to morph between the different states at any given time. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that was the first game I was able to use that in efficiently. And is Boulder Canyon the one with the castle in? Because the castle one, yes. So it was fun getting that working, and it just means that you can play the game at a different speed, because not everybody's as fast. And when it's all working properly, the player doesn't even realise that the music is changing automatically. You just take it as read. But it's nice to have those details in, and for no other reason than it amuses me. going to say, if other people found it entertaining, then that's a result.
Yeah, no, I loved it as a kid. I still love it as an adult even. And do you know, I guess in the case of Boulder Canyon, do you know why it was that specific track to get that benefit? And did you explore it in any others?
I think I would have explored it in others had we had a bit more time.
Right, yeah.
So I think at the point where I was probably going to have the intent of changing it for lots of other tracks, but when we knew that we had an earlier release date and we had to put all the Diddy Kong stuff in, that probably was the end of that experiment. But the fact that it was working was, even if only on a few tracks, I was very pleased with.
Oh, who thought of Taj humming the music too when you get close to him, the genie? If you remember.
I have no idea. So it's probably because, obviously, with it being a video game and you listen to it over and over and over again, the chances are somebody in the development team was just so fed up with hearing it that it was ingrained, and they were just coming along and somebody, that's a good idea. Let's give that to Taj. If he can start singing, that would be cool. It's probably one of those scenarios, but who actually specifically came up with it, I don't know.
I imagine that was the voice actor for Taj humming that as well, then.
Yeah, I forget, it was either Dean or Lee, one of the development artists who was doing the voice.
Now, I believe I remember reading at some point that part of the inspiration for, I guess, the world, the more open world of Diddy Kong Racing was it being based on like a Disney theme park, for instance, where you'd have different themes in a small, in a relatively confined area. Did that inspire the music at all?
I didn't think about it at the time. I just saw it as a sort of Disney-esque area, and I wasn't thinking about theme parks or anything. I just thought it looked fun and hot, and I needed a laid-back track. So I suppose it has a Caribbean leans up towards that a bit. I thought that was a fun kind of thing. So it's got that, I don't know, for lack of a better word, backbeat reggae type thing going on.
Right. Yeah.
And some of that is just because the movement moves it along nicely.
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, the music definitely just keeps you moving through the game. Like, it just flows very well, and it's always just a really fun time. And kind of to that point, I know Tom has a question about a theme he liked in particular in the game.
Oh, I was going to ask, what inspired the clever theme for TT in Time Trials when you run up to him?
The clock.
If you remember that, the clock.
It was one of the later ones. Obviously, Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, huge fan. And, yeah, I just thought that was kind of, again, we're going for the cheese. I just thought that was a fun pastiche to make for the time trial. It must have been something to do with the vocals. Somebody must have been making some Michael Jackson voices. I thought, that's a good idea. We'll push that one home.
Well, that's good. That's always what I kind of thought too. And then there's a clever pun kind of in there too, I guess, for the good times.
Yeah, it's one of those things. When you're in a development studio and you're working as a team, you're just bouncing ideas off all the time because you're there, you're physically there, and somebody says something and it sparks an idea. And you think, I'm just going to try that, and then you take it in and it sparks a graphic idea. And that's one of the good things about working in-house and as part of a team.
Unfortunately, which is something we don't get experience as much these days with the pandemic. And of course, Tom and I have always working remote for the past 12 years as part of GameXplain. So,
yeah, obviously I do work remotely, but we do have several meetings a day and keeping constant contact.
Good.
But I don't think you can be at least, even if it was only once a month for a few days, just being in the same room, bouncing ideas off people, that kind of thing. I think that's really important. And I think the pandemic has really hampered the ability for development studios to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe it. Were there any tracks you remember having a more difficult time with, or you just couldn't quite figure out what might be the best theme for it?
There were a few that were a bit harder just because I was with unfamiliar territory and discovering new things. And that's the great thing about writing music, the fact that you can learn stuff every day. It's still like that. So I'm still discovering stuff, which is great. Decade. Oh, wow, that's great. Discover that and see where that takes us. So that's one of the cool things. But no, it was I think every day it's still like that. There's you're always discovering new things and going off in new directions and seeing how far you can stretch things.
And I guess kind of along those lines, how did you, as we mentioned earlier, each of the characters has their own like instrument that goes along with them. How did you, like, was it up to you to determine like what character gets what instrument, or how did that process work?
Obviously, Banjo had a banjo.
Right.
Diddy Kong, I see him as having a little trumpet, muted trumpet. So that a lot of them, because of the shape and how they look, dictate how they might sound musically.
Right. So we interviewed you before, about Donkey Kong Country 1, Donkey Kong Country 2, and you also had some work. You had some involvement in Donkey Kong Country 3 as well.
Yeah, I did 5 tracks on 3, and then I did the advanced Game Boy version a bit later on.
Right, yeah. So you were there for the entire series, and of course, Diddy Kong Racing is a spin-off essentially of those games.
Absolutely. I mean, Kev came up with the character Diddy Kong, and
right.
Obviously introduced in number 1, Donkey Kong Country 1, and it was just an extension, I suppose, as you say, of that series, but for a racing game.
Yeah. So did that influence play much into it at all, or were you just going for a whole different vibe with Diddy Kong Racing?
With Diddy Kong Racing, I was going for the holiday program vibe. So in the UK, we have this thing called the holiday programming. Obviously now on TV and online and on podcasts, you've got hundreds of holiday programs. Mm-hmm. But back then, we weren't quite so flush with holiday programs, and it's nice. I think music is about escaping. When I'm sitting here in my office or my studio, I can just escape into different worlds. And I mean, today it's been just horrendous outside. It's not quite freezing, but it's been raining all day, and it's the worst type of weather because it's grey, and it's really cold because it's really wet. Right. And there's no fun in it. There's no snow to see. It's just feels dreadful, looks dreadful. And so today I've been escaping into completely the opposite of that, into a completely different world, and that's the joys of writing music. And with Diddy Kong Racing, that was a perfect example of that. I was always escaping into these holidays that I hadn't quite been on at that point. How I imagine they might sound.
I love that because Frosty Village in particular, like, always gives me such amazing Christmas vibes. Like, whenever I make a video involving Christmas on our channel, it has to use Frosty Village because it nails like what I imagine how Christmas should sound like.
I think that's how Christmas should sound, And also, I love skiing. I always have done. So, any chance to have a bit of snow or Christmassy influence things, and it was based on an Austrian ski kind of setting as well. So it's meant to be quite a romantic interpretation of it.
Yeah. On that note, is that one of your favorite tracks of the game, or like if you had maybe your top 3 tracks, what would you consider for Diddy Kong Racing?
So it's like, how do you choose between your kids?
I know.
It's impossible. Depends what mood you're in, I suppose. Right. And again, with music, it's all about what mood you're in. Some days you're in a dark mood, some days you're in the happiest mood known to mankind. Some days you're in a dark mood and you want to feel happy, so you write a happy tune. So it depends. So I personally like them all. I was very pleased with all of them.
Good. That makes me happy to hear.
I think also because it was such a fun game, it was a great team to work on. It was a good title to work on eventually, as in, it went from one thing which was good to work on and then came Diddy Kong Racing. So, yeah, very fond memories.
Yeah, actually, do you have any other favorite memories that stand out that we haven't touched on yet at all from working on the game?
Well, I think it was a really hot year. We used to work in a metal bar, and I'm sure other people on the development team might have mentioned it might have been a bit sweaty in there. They had these big, we all had these big silicon graphics machines that were like little heaters. Well, they were probably like big heaters, really. And we still needed to use them in the summer. So Stephen Stamper, who was brother of Tim and Chris, he'd be there cutting out big holes and putting extractor fans so we could actually push as much of the hot heat outside as possible. But we were fighting a losing battle because it was so hot that summer anyway. And we'd wander in shorts and t-shirts and just try and get through. But yeah, we were probably quite thin at that point.
Yeah, that helped, I imagine.
That's like a sauna. But good fun memories, regardless.
Speaking of those fun memories, so like when playing multiplayer, how did you fare against the others, or do you remember who might have been usually coming out on top in the race?
Dean Smith, he was one of the artists. He was very good. He was. I mean, his main thing was taking the graphics that other people had done and compressing or not the main thing. He did lots of main things, but one of them was that he was compressing them down so in the distance they weren't quite as they didn't have as many polygons, and that's quite a skill in itself. But I can remember him being particularly good and almost unbeatable.
Wow. Do you remember who you used to play as in the game? Which character you'd choose?
No.
Fair enough.
Not at all. I probably you try them all to see what the different
Exactly.
things are. Yeah, exactly. So probably Timber until Timber wasn't, the main character anymore.
Shortly after Diddy Kong Racing, a few years after, there was a trailer shown off for what appeared to be a successor or spiritual successor type of thing to it called Donkey Kong Racing, and we were curious if you had done any work on that at all before it was canceled.
I think I'd done a few days on it. It was Ben Cullen, James Cullen's brother, who was working on that, and he was, making a really good job with the soundtrack. And it looked like, I mean, if there's a game I would love to play, even now, it is that game. It looked like such fun.
It did.
And to be honest, it was really fun. And I'm just a bit sore that it was never made, because I think even if somebody did it now, it would be a great game to play, jumping on animals and racing against them. That would be really cool. I'd find it amusing anyway.
Yeah, I wanted to, especially if they get you on board for the soundtrack.
Well, there's still time. I've got a few years left.
Let's hope more than just a few. David, is there anything else you wish we had asked you about the game, or that we haven't touched on yet at all?
But I'll just reiterate that it was great fun to make, and I'm still very proud of it. I think we're all still very proud of it. 25 years. 25 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, no, I was just replaying it a couple weeks ago, and I didn't expect to play through the whole game, but like I finished the entire game in one sitting. I'm like, man, that game is still fun, still holds up, and the music is still infectious.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, but 25 years. That's just shocking.
It's crazy. David, I guess for people who want to know what you're working on now, if you can speak to that at all.
I'd have to shoot you, and have to be very nice.
What about what about your side project though, DK Creations? Is there any updates?
Working on that, yes. We have been between, when we get enough time, we squeeze it in, and we've got something coming out very soon, but we can't quite tell you because we haven't quite finished that one off. So hopefully pique your interest there, and I would imagine by about December or early December you might get to see some of that.
Awesome. All right, we're gonna keep an eye out for that. Also, David, if people want to follow you on social media, where can they check out your stuff at?
There's Twitter, which is @DavidWise. There's Hive, which is just David Wise. I'm also on Facebook, and that's about it. I'm not on Instagram. I've got an Instagram account, but I don't have time to do all of them.
Yeah, I made one like 10.
You have to do some work, so.
Yeah, I made one years ago. I had like 6 pictures on there. I'd never use it for anything, so.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have time to do the social media properly. It's just impossible, but I sort of tinker every now and again, really, and remind people I'm still alive.
Well, keep posting those reminders, David. We appreciate it. All right, well, so if you want, you can find links to all those in the description below, including David's Twitter and Hive, and along with DK Creations, which is a very fun collaboration between David Wise and
Kev. Yeah, absolutely.
And, and we also interviewed Kev recently too. A great guy to talk with, and we'll have a link to that in the description below as well. David, thank you so much for joining us once again for Diddy Kong Racing's 25th anniversary. It's been a complete blast talking to you. Before for Donkey Kong Country and DKC2, and now again for Diddy Kong Racing. It's been a pleasure. So
fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
Bye,
You're
everyone.
welcome.